Nestled in the heart of Hollywood, the modest yet charming house where Mickey Rooney spent his final years has become a place of intrigue. After his passing in 2014, the new owners began noticing odd occurrences that defied explanation. Shortly after moving in, the couple reported frequent electrical issues. Lights flickered even though electricians found no faults in the wiring. One night, the chandelier in the dining room swayed gently, though there was no breeze or earthquake to cause it. A family friend jokingly remarked, "Looks like Mickey isn't ready to leave the stage." The eeriest incidents involved the doors. One summer evening, the front door creaked open while the family was watching a movie. Thinking it might be an intruder, the husband rushed to check, but no one was there. In another instance, the pantry door slammed shut, startling everyone in the kitchen. Attempts to dismiss these events as drafts or old hinges felt increasingly hollow. Several guests have described unnerving sensations, as though unseen hands brushed their shoulders or lightly tapped their backs. One guest, a longtime fan of Rooney's work, claimed she heard faint laughter in the living room, eerily similar to the actor's iconic chuckle. The most chilling account came from a neighbor who had known Rooney. While walking past the house late one evening, she swore she saw a shadowy figure peering out from an upstairs window. She described it as a silhouette wearing what appeared to be a fedora, a nod to Rooney's classic Hollywood style. Paranormal investigators who visited the property concluded that the occurrences were consistent with a residual haunting. They suggested that Mickey's vibrant energy, cultivated over decades in show business, might have imprinted itself on the house. Despite the eerie activity, the owners have grown accustomed to their spectral tenant. They've even embraced the legend, keeping a photograph of Mickey Rooney on the mantle as a kind of homage. "As long as he's just performing," the wife said with a nervous smile, "we're okay sharing the space." As the years went on, the strange occurrences at Mickey Rooney's house seemed to ebb and flow, almost as if tied to some unseen rhythm. The family noticed patterns. The flickering lights were most frequent on Sunday evenings, and the front door often creaked open precisely at 11:11 p.m. A detail the wife only discovered after nervously jotting down the times over a month. One evening, while the husband was working late, the wife was startled by the sound of faint piano music. The couple didn't own a piano, and the sound seemed to emanate from the far corner of the living room, where a small alcove now held a bookshelf. She froze, listening as the melody meandered into something vaguely familiar, a tune from one of Mickey Rooney's early films. When the sound abruptly stopped, she could hear her own shaky breaths filling the silence. The next day, she confided in a neighbor who had lived in the area for decades. Mickey had a piano there, the neighbor confirmed. Used to tinker away for hours. Said it helped him think. Then there were the voice's soft murmurs, too faint to make out, but unmistakably present. The couple initially thought they were hearing echoes from outside, but the voices always seemed to be in the same room, even when the windows were tightly shut. On one particularly quiet night, the husband decided to record the strange sounds using his phone. When he played back the recording, his face drained of color. Amidst the static was a raspy whisper, "You're not alone." Convinced that they needed answers, the family invited a renowned medium to the house. The medium, a stern woman in her 60s with a reputation for uncovering the truths of haunted homes, spent several hours walking through each room. She paused longest in the small office upstairs, where Mickey had reportedly spent countless nights reviewing scripts. "He's here," the medium said finally, her voice a mix of certainty and unease. "But it's not just him." The family exchanged nervous glances. "What do you mean, not just him?" the wife asked. The medium didn't answer immediately. She stepped into the hallway, her gaze fixed on something unseen. "This house, it's a stage. And the curtains never come down." The medium's cryptic statement lingered in the air, heavy and unresolved. The family pressed her for more details, but her answers grew increasingly vague. "It's not something I can fully explain," she muttered, her eyes darting toward the shadows pooling at the edges of the hallway. "There's a presence here that's layered. Rooney's energy is only part of it." That night, as the family tried to resume some semblance of normalcy, the wife couldn't shake the medium's final warning. Whatever you do, don't try to communicate with it directly. But as the days passed, curiosity gnawed at them. Who or what could possibly share the space with Rooney's lingering spirit? 2 weeks later, the answer seemed to come unbidden. The wife discovered an old trunk hidden in the attic, buried beneath decades of dust and forgotten Christmas decorations. Inside were faded photographs, handwritten notes, and an assortment of trinkets props from Mickey Rooney's career, including a top hat and a cane. But tucked underneath it all was something entirely unexpected. A battered script with no title, its cover yellowed and brittle. The husband flipped through its pages, noting strange scrawls in the margins. Some were written in Mickey's distinctive handwriting, while others looked older. The ink faded to near invisibility. The final page, however, stopped them cold. Scribbled in large, frantic letters were the words, "It's not what it seems." Later that night, the couple awoke to a peculiar sound, a rhythmic tapping echoing from downstairs. The husband, emboldened by the mystery of the script, crept down to investigate. He followed the noise to the living room, where the chandelier swayed gently, casting eerie shadows across the walls. As he stepped closer, the tapping abruptly stopped. The room was still, save for the faint creak of the floor beneath his feet. He was about to head back upstairs when he caught sight of something out of the corner of his eye, a reflection in the mirror above the fireplace. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but there was no mistaking it. A figure seated in the armchair by the window. The chair had been empty seconds ago. Swallowing his fear, the husband turned to face the chair directly. It was empty now, but the faint imprint of someone sitting there remained pressed into the cushion, as if the figure had vanished the moment he turned. When he glanced back at the mirror, the figure was no longer there, but something else was. Scrawled across the surface, in a fog-like condensation that hadn't been there a moment ago, was a single word, "Listen." The husband backed away, his pulse hammering in his ears. Upstairs, the wife's voice called out, her tone unusually calm, "What's taking you so long?" But as he climbed the stairs, he realized her voice wasn't coming from their bedroom. It was coming from the office. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. Heart pounding, the husband paused at the top of the stairs. The hallway stretched before him like a dark, yawning tunnel. The office door was ajar, the faint light from the street lamp outside casting strange, shifting patterns on the floor. His wife's voice called again, softer this time, almost coaxing. "Come in here, you need to see this." But something was off. He had just left her in the bedroom, half asleep, barely coherent. That voice, it carried a tone of urgency that didn't belong to the woman he had just kissed goodnight. Taking a hesitant step forward, he crept toward the office, his bare feet making no sound on the hardwood floor. The air grew colder with each step, and by the time he reached the door, he could see his breath clouding the air. Pushing the door open, he found the room illuminated by a dim, unnatural light that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The old desk, the one they had debated keeping because of its supposed connection to Mickey Rooney, now seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive. Papers were strewn across its surface pages from the script they had found in the attic. But it was the figure in the chair that made his blood run cold. At first, he thought it was his wife, but the posture was all wrong, too rigid, too unnatural. As the figure turned its head, he saw its face clearly for the first time. It wasn't his wife. It wasn't even human. The face was blurred, as though smeared like a wet painting. Yet the eyes were distinct, dark, hollow voids that seemed to pull him in, filling his mind with an overwhelming sense of loss and regret. He stumbled backward, gripping the doorframe for support, as the figure slowly rose from the chair. Its form shimmered, shifting between solidity and shadow, growing taller with each step it took toward him. And then it spoke, in a voice that was both Mickey Rooney's and not, a layered, fractured tone that seemed to come from all directions at once. "You've opened the door." Behind him, he heard the sound of footsteps on the stairs, heavy, deliberate steps, impossibly loud in the otherwise silent house. He turned, expecting to see his wife rushing to him, but the staircase was empty. The footsteps continued, growing closer, echoing in his ears like a heartbeat. Panicking, he dashed back into the bedroom, slamming the door behind him. His wife sat up, startled, her face pale. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice trembling. Before he could answer, they both heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping, now coming from their bedroom window. The husband glanced toward it, dreading what he might see. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, as if whatever was on the other side was demanding entry. And then, for the first time, they both heard it clearly, a low, musical hum, unmistakably the opening notes of a song. One of Mickey Rooney's most famous ballads. The music seemed to swirl in the air around them, distant but undeniable, a melody neither of them recognized consciously, but that tugged at some forgotten corner of their memories. It was as if the house itself had come alive, drawing them into its dark, unseen web. The tapping on the window continued, now mixed with the faint sound of a door creaking open somewhere far down the hall. The entire house seemed to be echoing with the weight of forgotten footsteps and unfinished stories. The wife's eyes darted nervously to the window, then to the door. "Who's there?" she whispered, though she didn't truly expect an answer. There had been no one outside when they checked earlier that evening. But the tapping did not stop. It grew louder, more insistent, until the glass began to vibrate slightly under the pressure of it. She stood slowly, as though moved by some unseen force, and approached the window. Her husband tried to grab her arm, but his hand passed through her as though she were made of smoke. A chill ran down his spine, but his focus remained on her. She was moving with a purpose now, her movements strangely deliberate, not her own. The music rose in volume, filling the room with a haunting clarity. The wife reached for the window, her fingers pressing lightly against the cold glass. The tapping stopped, but before she could pull her hand away, the air thickened around them, the atmosphere growing heavy, oppressive. "What's happening?" the husband gasped, his voice strained. But the wife didn't answer. She stared into the night beyond the window, her face expressionless, as though she could see something he could not. Then, without warning, she whispered a name, Mickey. The air in the room seemed to freeze. A low, almost inaudible laugh rippled through the silence, a sound like the shifting of air, and then the room darkened as if the very walls had absorbed all the light. The husband could feel a presence behind him, closing in, but when he turned, there was nothing there. Suddenly, the figure from the office reappeared at the doorway. Its form was more solid now, standing just inside the threshold, watching them with eyes that were now impossibly wide, staring through them, rather than at them. In a moment of horrific clarity, the husband realized what had been happening. The house, with all its dark history and hidden memories, was not merely haunted by Mickey Rooney's spirit. No, the house itself had become a stage, a place where the boundary between the past and present had begun to erode. The very walls were absorbing the energy of those who had lived there, blending the living with the dead in a twisted performance that played over and over again, like a never-ending show. And they were now part of it. "You've opened the door," the voice echoed again, now coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. The wife, still gazing out the window, whispered softly, "It's time for the final act." The temperature dropped even further, and the husband's breath came out in visible clouds. In the reflection of the window, he saw a shadow behind them, tall and bent, its shape jagged like a broken frame. The song, that same haunting melody, began again, but now it was accompanied by a low rumbling sound, as if something deep within the house was stirring, awakening. The walls groaned, and the floor trembled beneath their feet. Something was moving toward them, something that had been trapped within the house for far too long. The walls seemed to groan in unison with the deep rumble, as if the house itself were alive, angry, disturbed, and desperate to release what had been sealed within it. The temperature plummeted further, and the coldness seeped into their bones, weighing down on them like a physical presence. The melody continued, its notes warping as though the very air around them was distorting. The husband turned back toward his wife, but she was no longer the woman he had married. Her eyes, now wide and hollow, stared straight ahead, unblinking. Her lips, stiff and unmoving, began to murmur the same words over and over. It's time for the final act. The show must go on. Her voice was layered, as though two voices were speaking at once, Mickey Rooney's unmistakable tone blending with something darker, deeper, older. With a flash of panic, the husband grabbed her by the shoulders and shook her. Listen to me. This isn't you. It's not her, whatever this is. But she didn't react. She simply stood there, rooted to the spot, her hands pressed against the window as though she were waiting for something to come through. Then, a sudden creak echoed through the house, followed by the distinct sound of a door opening from the far end of the hallway. The husband froze, his breath catching in his throat. It was the attic door, the one they'd never dared to open. The air grew heavier still, thick with the scent of dust and age. The laughter from earlier, that same eerie, ghostly chuckle, rose again, this time louder, closer, as though it were coming from the attic itself. It wasn't Mickey's laugh anymore. It was something else, something sinister, a sound too sharp to be human. Instinct took over. The husband rushed to the attic door, his hands shaking as he reached for the handle. But just before he could turn it, a voice, low and gravelly, whispered in his ear from behind. Don't go up there. He whipped around, but the room was empty. The door to the office was still ajar, and the shadowed figure had not moved. Yet he could feel it, the presence, pressing closer to him, as if it were surrounding him, wrapping around him like a thick fog. The voice returned, louder now, almost mocking. You've opened it, haven't you? You thought you could understand, but you're not part of this world anymore. Not anymore. The husband's mind raced. What had he opened? What was it that had been sealed away in this house, buried beneath layers of time, of actors and memories? The music, that strange melody, was it some kind of signal? The shadowed figure, the distorted laughter, none of it made sense. Yet it all seemed so real, so tangible. A sound broke his spiraling thoughts, the creak of the attic stairs beneath unseen feet. The door was wide open now, as though inviting him. Suddenly, his wife turned, her body jerking unnaturally, as if she were being moved by invisible strings. Her face was expressionless, but her mouth moved, speaking words that didn't match her lips. Come join us. The curtain never falls. His heart pounded in his chest as he took a step back, but the sound of the attic door swinging open was too much. He couldn't resist. He had to know. As his feet carried him toward the stairs, a sudden realization struck him with the force of a thunderclap. The show, this was no performance. It was a trap, and he was the unwitting star, drawn in by forces far older than any of them. When his hand touched the banister, a flood of visions overwhelmed him, scenes from Mickey Rooney's life, flashes of forgotten moments, desperate eyes staring from the shadows. And among them, something else, a dark figure standing in the far corner of the attic, watching him with a smile that didn't belong to anyone. Then the stairs groaned beneath him, as if the house itself were warning him to turn back. But it was too late. The stairs creaked under the weight of his steps, each one more reluctant than the last. The air grew colder still, thick with the presence of something ancient, something trapped within the bones of the house for far too long. The strange melody of the haunting song continued, looping in his mind, pulling him deeper into the house's strange, unyielding grip. His wife stood motionless at the top of the stairs, her face a mask of emptiness, her lips still whispering those same chilling words, the show must go on. He reached the top, his breath ragged and shallow, his hands trembling as he placed them against the door to the attic. It was ajar, the darkness inside so complete that it seemed to swallow up the light from the hallway. But beyond the darkness, he could make out the faintest outline of something or someone moving. Then, from the depths of the attic, a voice echoed, low and rasping, carrying with it a weight of both history and sorrow. Welcome to the final act. He stepped into the attic, drawn forward by the force of the voice, unable to turn back. His footsteps were drowned out by the overwhelming silence, until the only sound was the soft rustling of papers and the creaking of the wooden beams. But then, just as he began to move deeper into the room, the door slammed shut behind him. The sudden noise echoed in his ears, and a wave of panic surged through him. He turned, slamming his shoulder against the door in a desperate attempt to escape, but it didn't budge. He pounded harder, yelling, but no sound seemed to escape the attic. The air had thickened, the pressure unbearable, as if the very walls of the house were closing in. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it them shadows shifting, figures moving slowly in the dark. At first, they seemed like mere wisps, nothing more than the play of light and shadow. But as they grew clearer, he saw the faces, those of men and women he did not recognize, their expressions blank, eyes wide and unseeing. They were all staring at him, their forms flickering, as if they were caught between two worlds, their movements jerky and unnatural. A figure stood among them, tall and thin, its face obscured by shadows. It was the same presence that had been watching him in the reflection, the one he had glimpsed in the doorway earlier. The figure smiled a wide, grotesque grin that stretched far too far across its face. "It's not the end, not yet," it rasped, its voice like 1,000 whispers, all overlapping, all demanding his attention. The attic seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the house's heartbeat. The figures moved closer, their eyes locked on him, and suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his chest, a cold, biting sensation, like ice spreading through his veins. He gasped, unable to breathe, as though the house itself were draining him of everything he was. And then he heard it, faint at first, but growing louder with each passing second. The sound of applause. Soft at first, like the echo of a distant crowd, but as the figures began to circle him, the applause grew. It was slow at first, hesitant, but then it built, the clapping growing louder, more frantic. The figures surrounded him, their hands outstretched, as if beckoning him to join them in their endless, unholy performance. "Come on, star," the voice whispered, echoing in his head. "Join the show. The curtain never falls." The clapping continued, the sound deafening, and as the last ounce of air left his lungs, the shadows closed in. His vision blurred as the faces of the figures became clearer, faces he recognized now. They were actors, forgotten stars of an older era, lost to time, trapped in the house just as he had been, performing their endless act, doomed to repeat the same moments forever. And just as the darkness fully enveloped him, he understood. The house had been built for them, for the lost and forgotten. It was a stage where time unraveled, where the living and the dead collided, where the curtain never truly fell. And now, he was part of it, another actor in the house's endless, shifting performance. When the last echo of his breath faded, the house was silent once again. The music stopped, the shadows dissipated, and somewhere, deep within the attic, a door slowly creaked open. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. Any coincidences with real events or characters are accidental.